Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. My name is not Joe. No, it is Joe Patrick. I am the Falcons insider for 92.9 The Game, and just back from Flowery Branch yet again for the final day of mandatory minicamp. I'm going to borrow a phrase from Mark Raimondi today, saying there was big kind of last day of school vibes today up at practice. It's the last time these guys will be around each other as a group for about the next 5 weeks until we get to training camp. And so does kind of have that feel. Even the practice itself, I will say, we will not be talking about really what happened at practice because maybe the most exciting part was seeing players try to throw the balls into trash cans. Like it was almost kind of a field day atmosphere out there. There was a little bit of teamwork and stuff that they did. I don't want to say it was like a total, like, uh, waste of a practice session or anything, but it was definitely kind of just um, more of a relaxed play around, feel good type of atmosphere. A lot of families out there watching everything go down. So what we're going to talk about today is, a couple things that were mentioned by Raheem Morris and, some other players and such at practice today, and a little bit about the run game, because this is something I know Aaron Freeman has touched on, which I'll be joining Aaron Freeman on his show soon. And what changes to potentially expect in that respect. But I thought that, one of the more interesting things to come out of today was the press conference with Raheem Morris, wondering about a guy who I've seen on the field a lot and nobody's really been discussing. I think because when he joined the team, it was not long after that. Obviously, the draft happened, and then you had all these more players, prestigious players to talk about. But it's Divine Deablo. Divine Deablo, to me, has been kind of slotted next to Caden Ellis as a starter for this Falcons team, and part of that is because Troy Andersen has not been on the field as the team is being cautious with a lot of these guys. We've talked about Kyle Pitts and Caleb McGarry, and Troy Andersen is another one of those guys. He's been around at OTAs, by the way, in previous weeks. He's been on the field, just not dressed up, ready to go. But I think that they're just, again, being cautious with him, don't want to exert him too much. And I fully expect him to be full go by the time training camp starts. But in his stead, Divine Deablo has been the guy who's slotted next to Caden Ellis as the starting linebacker pretty much in the team's base defense, which is basically a nickel package. And, I say starter, and I want to say off the bat that even Raheem Morris said today that they haven't even kind of gotten around to thinking about necessarily who the quote unquote starters are on this defense in various positions, and especially with regards to the rookies. But even with someone like Divine Deablo, I'm saying that he has been starting because he has been with the first unit. But where he actually fits in the pecking order once all the players return and they get to kind of see them fight for jobs and stuff like that. We'll find out more about exactly how big his role will be. But if what Raheem Morris said today is anything to go off of, he's certainly going to be contending for a player who is going to be starting, because I was a little blown away at just the way that Raheem Morris was talking about a player in Deablo as potentially a guy who could even be a green dot wearer. And the green dot, if you're unfamiliar, is the helmet that has the radio in it, and that's the player who calls the plays. It's usually the middle linebacker. Caden Ellis has worn that green dot for the last couple of years, but now it's on it's not on Divine Deablo, but Raheem Morris said that Divine Deablo is a guy who could do that, and that's pretty impressive considering still relatively new to the linebacker position. Raheem Morris said that he liked Divine Deablo a lot coming out of college, along with Jamie and Sherwood, both of which were college safeties that were, understood to be transitioning to linebacker in the NFL. And it's unsurprising that the Falcons were kind of linked with Jamie and Sherwood also in free agency, where ultimately they get Divine Deablo. Jamie and Sherwood probably just goes for a price ultimately that was more than the Falcons could afford, but maybe not a terrible plan B in Divine Deablo. And on the price tag, so I was recently, I was just scrolling through Instagram or whatever, and you see another NFL account that's kind of taking shots at the Falcons for decisions they've made that have kind of blown up in their face, which absolutely has happened. I forget even. I think you maybe talk about the quarterback situation. I don't even remember. But I think that, and he was kind of using whatever bad decision the Falcons made as an example of just how they make these bad signings, these mistakes over and over, and that's not true. And I think the Falcons have actually been pretty good in some of this tier of free agent signing, of which they got Divine Deablo, and it's not dissimilar from Caden Ellis, frankly. And when the Falcons signed Caden Ellis, I believe it was to a 3-year deal for, I think, about 21 million or something over the course of the 3 years, so about 7 million a year. A lot of people were saying that was an overpay, and I don't think anybody's saying he's overpaid at this point. You would say the same thing, or a lot of people were saying the same thing about Darnell Mooney, frankly, last year. And I get it. I get why there was some skepticism as to whether what the Falcons ultimately paid Mooney, what if they were going to get their value for that. What ultimately happened was Mooney looks like a steal now, especially in Zach Robinson's offense, and with Michael Penix now becoming the quarterback. I think it could even get better, even better for Darnell Mooney. But I say that just to say that I think the Falcons have shown some shrewdness in some of these, mid-tier, mid-level free agent signings, not the top end guys, but these guys that you use to kind of fill out your roster. And it's a little bit of a gamble. I think when you make these types of signings, first of all, it's always going to come in more, in my opinion, than what the projections typically are. I know the projections are kind of building in some of the inflation that happens over the course of, as the NFL goes, just the contracts keep going up. So players are just going to keep getting paid more and more. But I think the Falcons have done a really good job in this respect of finding the players that they think that there's a fit for them in the team, that there's a pathway for them to fit into whatever the scheme is, whether it's on offense or defense, and then for them to grow. And it's that kind of prospecting that ultimately the good teams have to do well, especially if, like the Falcons, you don't have some of the draft picks. Either you just don't have the sheer number of draft picks like other teams, like the Baltimore Ravens, for example, have tons of rookies that are coming in every year. And when you are taking that many bites of the apple, ultimately many are going to hit. Falcons haven't had that many, so they've got to basically supplement the team with some players like this. And so it's certainly an optimistic attitude from Raheem Morris, the way he was talking about Deablo today. And in particular, he talked about, we all knew that he has these athletic traits. He's got the kind of length and athleticism that is I want to say you don't see it at linebacker, but it's clearly like at the higher end because he is transitioning from safety. But what Raheem Morris said is that he reads and reacts kind of better than the team frankly thought he would. And I think it shows his growth at the position, the fact that Raheem Morris would say that. And I'm particularly interested in that kind of read and react phrase because it's something that was actually mentioned today by one of the players. I can't remember who it was, but it was talking about this attack style front. I think it was Jalen Walker. Was talking about this attack style front that Nate Ollie and Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich are trying to bring to this group. We talked about on the show yesterday what that means is more penetrating one gap style of defense along that defensive front. And what that means for the players behind that front is they have to do the reading and reacting. And especially, I think they were talking about secondary players. The secondary basically has to read what's happening in front of them because it is going to be a little bit more chaotic than players on the defensive front who are two gapping and kind of keeping everything in front of them. And they've got to make up for some of those gaps. And so it'll be interesting to see how Divine Deablo is going to be able to do there. And I think it also raises the question of how well Troy Andersen is going to be able to perform in that system, because he's also not a player who has played linebacker his whole career. And when you talk about Divine Deablo and Troy Andersen, they're kind of in the same boat because they are these kind of uber athletic types. But neither of them are kind of born and bred as a linebacker. Basically, more like Caden Ellis is more along the lines of somebody, even though he is not traditionally a middle linebacker through and through. He has played kind of on that side of the ball, obviously, and just in that defensive front more than some of these guys. So interesting to see. Interesting to hear Raheem Morris talk so glowingly about Divine Deablo, but I'm not particularly surprised by that. But that was interesting, and I think notable as we head into training camp here in just over a month. One of the other things I thought was interesting that Raheem Morris was mentioning was about kind of the way that the team has been trying to be a little bit more proactive in terms of trying to pair guys up with each other that might be like of similar character and they will get along well, or kind of, I say mentors. How much of it's actually mentoring the way that you or I might perceive that word, I don't know. But certainly it helps to have, for a rookie to have a veteran in the locker room who he feels like he can go to if he has a question, or just someone to be a sounding board, just someone to lean on and pick their brains and whatnot. And last year that was kind of most notable with Michael Penix, the team's top pick, and now the starting quarterback, being placed right next to Jesse Bates. And that was not by accident. The coaching staff wanted to make sure that Michael Penix, the future of the franchise, was around maybe the smartest, most prepared football player that they have on the team in Jesse Bates. In fact, I think one of the guys in the secondary was talking today that Jesse, I think it was Mike Hughes, saying that he's far from the most athletic player on the team, but he's by far the most prepared and can sometimes call out specifically what teams are going to be running before it even happens. And sure enough, it happens. And so it was great for Michael Penix. I think he's spoken about that, and just that experience of being next to Jesse Bates in the locker room, and particularly interesting because those players would go against each other in practice. Remember, Michael Penix was the scout team quarterback who was throwing against the first team defense where Jesse Bates was. And so that gave them great opportunities to talk about, what they were seeing on certain plays. Sometimes it was Penix talking about what he was seeing from Bates and how he was trying to deceive him or whatever. So that's certainly great training for both of them. And anyway, Raheem was talking about some of the current rookies who and kind of who they've paired them up with. And James Pierce Jr. has kind of been paired or put alongside AJ Terrell. Raheem basically said that they are guys of a similar personality, that they're very intentional and they're good communicators when they have your attention and you have theirs, and you're just talking one-on-one. Obviously this kind of character concern, I kind of put that in quotations just because that's the way it's been phrased around James Pierce Jr. through the pre-draft process. Raheem said he's just not a guy who's going to deal very well. He's not going to be very natural when he steps to a podium in a press conference setting and is talking to 20 different people in the room. And I'm sure myself and a lot of you guys might be the same way. We might not be who we feel like we are on the inside when we're trying to present ourselves in that way. And he's a totally different person when you are kind of, have some more intentionality to it and you're focusing one-on-one with him. And apparently AJ is that way. And so that's why he wanted to put them together. Also thought it was interesting that Raheem Morris said that they've kind of put Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman Jr. near Chris Lindstrom for similar reasons. And he didn't kind of go into the details of the personal reasons or the personal characteristics as to why they fit together. But hey, I mean, I think anyone would be well served by being near Chris Lindstrom in the locker room, because he is a good team leader. He's been around Bijan for a while in the previous version of the locker room. It is kind of funny to just see ultimately how the locker room settles out in terms of what players are near each other. And, previously, from what I understand, it was pretty random. It was pretty, players who left the team left their lockers, and then players who joined the team, then, there were some lockers that were open and they would just choose whichever one they wanted. And that in and of itself created a certain randomness in the room that allowed guys to just, bond in different ways, cross positions, that kind of thing. By the way, at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for a game, there you do have them kind of not cordoned off, but they are kind of segmented by position, because that makes sense. When you're in a game setting, you need your position coach to be able to come over, be able to kind of talk to the group inside that locker room if needed. So there they are. But when we talk about the locker room, we're talking about where they work 6 days of the week during the season, which is at the Flowery Branch facility. So, it used to be kind of random, and now Raheem Morris is trying to put some intention into how the room is arranged. And I got to say, he was kind of asked, like, you got to play a psychologist to really be doing this, and he kind of laughed about it. But I do think that Raheem, as a guy, he's that quote unquote players coach and everything, but he is a guy who really does develop relationships with players. He mentioned earlier in OTAs that he brought Bijan up to New Jersey with him to see a boxing match. And so they want to do these kinds of things and build these kinds of relationships. And I think for that reason, Raheem probably has a good feel for the personalities of different players and who's going to kind of get along with who might appreciate who, in terms of like the professional side of it. And so, just thought that was interesting and good to see. So let's talk about some other stuff. want to talk about first also the pacing and just kind of the way that the team has been operating throughout this OTAs. You may have noticed in previous sessions, for example, James Pierce Jr. not participating in team drills or even individual drills, just watching while other guys do stuff, whatever it may have been. And I'm just using him as an example because I remember that one. Raheem said that this is all obviously very intentional, and it's so that the team can get a great grasp on what actually are their physical load levels where that they can go to, and that's kind of what this period is for. It's for introducing the scheme, introducing how things are going to work, how practices are scheduled, what obviously installing some things, but it's also about the team getting a better understanding for the players on a very individual basis as to what they can handle, because they want to be pushing players as hard as they can, but not be pushing them over what they can handle. And at this professional level with this much staff and resources dedicated to it, the Falcons can afford to be very particular with how they can regimen these players throughout practices. I mean, I think back to when I was playing football in high school. You can see my helmet behind me there. There was nobody got any special treatment. Nobody had any like individual time, or you weren't saying, oh well, he's going to sit out and take some reps off because he needs to recuperate a little bit. He had a hard day the day before. No, everybody was going as hard as you could every time, and that's ultimately not optimal. It might be optimal for trying to get the most out of every player to work as hard as they can, which can sometimes be, when you're playing at high school football level, you got guys dogging it, myself included. And these guys, these professionals, they're not dogging it. When they are taking reps, they're going full bore. And so it's Raheem's job to kind of hold them back. And I thought it was funny today. He was joking about how he has to play police officer. Basically, he's a cop in during OTAs, where he's constantly telling people, hey, slow down, slow down. Just trying to preserve them, trying to keep them as fresh as possible, while these players can obviously get the work in that they need. But there's no concerns about guys obviously not going as hard as they possibly could. So that's kind of been a theme though for a lot of players though. When we've talked to Drake London about it just yesterday, and it's kind of a learning process for some of these guys, especially when you're a rookie. You want to come into a team and really stamp yourself on, make an imprint on the coaches, that kind of thing. And you're just a competitor. The way that Drake said it, everybody on this team has got that competitive drive, that competitiveness to be great. And you got to learn how to dial that back. And maybe today I don't have to be the greatest player out here amongst my teammates. Maybe today's the day I need to, dial it back so that on Sunday I can be the best player for my team. So obviously they won't be playing on Sundays anytime in the near future, but it will be coming around soon. We're all looking forward to that. Again, not a lot to talk about from practice today, so I did just kind of want to talk about a topic that I heard Aaron Freeman on Locked On Falcons talking about the other day, which is the team's run game. And obviously, this team has been very outside zone heavy. I think we may have even talked about this on the show. Maybe it was last week or so. But I do expect the run game to be, I don't know if I would say more diverse necessarily than what they have been, but I just expect it to be a little different than what it was last year. And I think that reason is because of the new center and Ryan Neuzil. And I don't think it's not necessarily because Ryan Neuzil is some better center that can do things that Drew Dahlman couldn't. But actually, I think it's more of the opposite of that. I think it's more of Ryan Neuzil cannot do things that Drew Dahlman could do. And for that reason, they're going to have to navigate around that and figure out the best way to do the things that Ryan Neuzil is good at, which is using his power, using his explosiveness, his speed off the ball, and not necessarily like Drew Dahlman was so good in that outside zone to be able to reach even a middle linebacker going either way, left or right. And Ryan Neuzil is just not that kind of player. He doesn't have the same kind of body type. And so I think the team is going to have to adjust or want to adjust to get the best out of the run game. And the reason why I suspect this is the case is something that Zach Robinson was talking about with regards to the run game earlier when we had access to the assistant coaches earlier this summer. And it was that, when he's talking about the run game, and he said, when I came in here to the Falcons, it's not like I had this zone running scheme that I was really set on and that we wanted to run. It's because they were already a great outside zone team, and so why should I come in and say we got to do something different? Like, that would make no sense. This team is already a very efficient outside zone team, and so we should stick to that as much as possible to get the best out of this run game and to be the most efficient offense as possible. That's his whole goal, is just to be the most efficient offense possible. And therefore, they will do whatever they feel like they need to do in order to be that. And I think that if the team were to just say, okay, let's just stick to the outside zone, as our bread and butter, and maybe it still will be what they do run predominantly. But I don't know if that's if they to just do that would be the way that you get the most out of what is now a reconstituted new offensive line. Now you've got a different piece in there, one in particular, who's got a certain set of skills, like Liam Neeson and Taken, that you can, you have to find a way to be the most efficient run game possible with Ryan Neuzil. And I think that could involve some more gap scheme stuff, some more interior running. Again, I'm not saying that they're going to throw everything out that they've done, but I think that we will see new wrinkles in this run game. And I have no doubts that Bijan Robinson is going to absolutely make the most of it. He looks like he's in incredible shape. Raheem Morris was talking about today that yesterday he just made a cut, and they're not even in pads or anything, but just the cut and the way he moves. He said that everyone's jaws just dropped, and Raheem Morris wanted to just be like, all right, let's all just go home now. This is ridiculous. But that's just the talent that Bijan is. And so I expect the team to continue to have one of the best running attacks in the NFL. And I also think for Bijan's part, he could actually, have one of his better receiving years in the NFL, since he's been a pro next year. Partly because I think this offense is going to be more proficient down the field, be looking more downfield. I think opposing defenses are going to be, on their heels a little bit, looking out for that. And I think that there could be more room for Bijan to operate when he's able to get the ball in some of those shorter distances. And it'll be interesting to see. I think part of that is on Penix, whether he's going to be forcing those balls into those deep shots, because he clearly has a tendency. He wants to do that. He wants to push the ball downfield. But I think there should be some opportunities for him to hit some checkdowns, or even on some designer, routes that Bijan can have, where the team feels like they can be successful. We saw them nearly link up on a really nice wheel route last year. And, I would expect him to continue to be a threat there. He talked last year about wanting to kind of be that more Christian McCaffrey, be more of a traditional running back as opposed to what he was in his rookie year, Arthur Smith's last year, where Arthur Smith was splitting him out as a wideout quite a bit. They were having him do a lot in the passing game. And I think that we're obviously seeing the best of Bijan Robinson now that he is more of a traditional running back, or being used in the traditional way. I think the reason why, by the way, that Arthur Smith wanted to do that was partly to help preserve Bijan. I think that they knew that wasn't like the final form of what they thought the Falcons were going to be. Obviously, that coaching staff didn't get a chance to finish that evolution, but I think that in Bijan's rookie year, they didn't want to put him, 8 yards in the backfield, hand it to him, and just have him get pounded and pounded every single game of his rookie year, because they knew that he was a special player that they needed to keep somewhat fresh. But I think that he's just shown himself to be so valuable as a runner. He's so graceful to watch. If you have to go to the bathroom, I highly recommend just searching Bijan Robinson 2024 highlights. And it's a pretty entertaining watch. Let's say it that way. So anyway, that's going to be it for us this week from minicamp. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another full week of Joe Patrick on football. We'll be back next week and the weeks following, hopefully with some guests on to be able to talk about what they are expecting of this Falcons team, what they think about some of the players, what they think about what's happened during the draft, since the draft, over those OTAs and mandatory minicamp. And so, looking forward to bringing that to all of you guys. You can catch the show on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's on Spotify or you can watch us on YouTube. Been posting clips on Instagram and Twitter. So you can find us pretty much anywhere. Just search Joe Patrick on football, 9010 the game, and I'm sure you won't have any trouble finding us. So thank you guys so much, and take care.